Welcome to Moments with Marianne. I'm so delighted we're going to be spending this time here today. We have a very inspirational show coming right up. Today, our special guest is Kumu Ramsay Taum, and he's here today to talk to us about the spirit-of-aloha. Ramsay is founder and president of the Hawaiian-based Life Enhancement Institute of the Pacific, otherwise known as LE. And he teaches and lectures all over the world in regards to ancient Hawaiian principles and philosophy and how that relates to our modern day society. So let's welcome to the show, Ramsay.
Aloha, Marianne.
Aloha.
Thanks for having me back.
Well, you're such in my view, just a tremendous spiritual teacher. And I'm just always so honored to have the opportunity to talk with you. And I just enjoy these times that we have to talk about these different topics. I know we've got into quite a few other things in the past, and they're always so timely. Your message is always so timely.
Well, that's really kind of you, Marianne. And I'm very fortunate in that way, I guess. I like to say if you get out of the way long enough, some things kind of show up. And I think in our last conversation, I mentioned the idea of, if you volunteer and let the cosmos know you're ready, things start to happen. And just having that faith. And I'll tell you, I'm challenged with that all the time, because I want to put my hand on the pond to stop the ripples. And I end up creating more. So it's very challenging. So no, thank you for that compliment. Appreciate that.
Well, and I have actually poured through a lot of the videos that are online from you doing different speeches around, not just in Hawaii, but around the continent. And it's always been so, like your messages always have this heart to it that I think regardless if we're Hawaiian, if we're Catholic, if whatever, we're just humans, it applies to everybody.
Yes, I think that was one of the messages that I was hoping that would come through, primarily because the kupuna, the elders whom I was fortunate to spend time with and learn from, I believe they all operated that way as well. And it's not something you can really capture in words. In the delivery of something, you can say those things, but 2 or 3 people can say the same words and it'll never come through. And I think it is that thing called aloha. It's the spirit that's in there. One in the words themselves, the words you choose, but it's that connection between head and heart, which I think people will. There's a tendency for us to sense as being authentic, or being real. And these elders in kupuna were all like that. So I'm hoping that that's what's coming through, and that's the common thread that runs through the whole thing.
Now, I know today we're talking about the spirit of aloha and how we can incorporate that into our daily lives, and especially with this being, the holiday season, a lot of times you see an outpouring of caring for one another and love and what have you. In the Hawaiian culture, what does the spirit of aloha mean within like the family unit, within the community?
Well, it's interesting because it's not something that's really said. We may use the word more often than perhaps my grandmother would have used it, because they were living it and they didn't really have to reinforce it with words. So I think more and more people, regardless of whether they're of the place in terms of ancestry, if you live here long enough, and you engage in this place and its customs and practices, I think it begins to just, be part of that lifestyle. So it's something that people tend to feel when they come to Hawaii. And that's really respecting, an underlying respect for one another and the relationships, which really underlying it all, aloha, a very overview in terms of the definition, is about giving and receiving. And I think on an island, in an island community, that's a critical component about living together, sharing resources. And that's not to say that at some point in our history there weren't battles, ongoing battles and wars. I'm also a practitioner of the Hawaiian battle art. So it's acknowledging that part of it. But there was always aloha. At the end of the battle, community came back together again through the process of ho'oponopono, which is embracing and intended to reinstill aloha. And so this notion of giving and receiving, as you say, during this holiday season, Christmas, when gift giving is the tradition, in many ways that is one outward expression of aloha.
Mm-hmm. It seems like that the Hawaiians live that spirit of aloha every day. And from what I understand, and correct me if I'm wrong, it was more of, like when Hawaiians were growing up, they would more see how their parents and grandparents and community were and what they were acting and how things were going. It was more of they'd pass down stories and teachings as opposed to having it written down.
That's right. We really didn't have a written language. It wasn't until 1826 when the printing press was introduced, primarily for the purpose of teaching Hawaiians to read the Bible. Mm-hmm. And those that did get introduced to it really received it very well. At some point, the population here is said to about 80% or more of the population was literate. So at that point in time, in the mid-1800s, you had the most literate population per capita probably in the country or anywhere, reading their own language. And they said that they enjoyed it so much that they could read things upside down.
That's just crazy, but that's awesome.
Yeah, the Bible, but because I think they embraced the notion that they could now share these stories beyond themselves, because prior to that it was an oral language. So it wasn't just what we said, but it was also what you heard, which is really an important concept, and in today's world, people say, well, I told you, but did they hear you? Right? That's the big thing. So the Hawaiian language was oral and oral. And so we call this mo'olelo, storytelling or stories. And so from one generation, they shared stories from the previous generation. Now, interesting enough, when you are brought up in a tradition like that, where you're required to listen, because they're not going to tell you a second time. Mm-hmm. If you miss it, you miss it. And more importantly, if you get it wrong, there are consequences for getting something wrong. In the same way, there are consequences if you turn right or turn left when you should be going down a one-way street, right? Mm-hmm. So there are consequences to getting things wrong. So when you're listening to a kupuna or someone telling you the story, there's an intent. You have to be present. And interesting enough, knowing this, our kupuna built a language structure that is heavily coded. And if you understand the code, it makes it a lot easier. So there are memory techniques that people apply today, to enhance their ability to remember. Our ancestors had that built into the system already. So that was very helpful. So to take your observation, yes, stories were critical in the absence of other methods of information transfer. And they also came at you at very different levels, too.
So with the storytelling and I'm assuming, and you can tell me how this all works, that, the upcoming generation would really watch, and since they have that deep level of connectedness and listening, they would really watch their elders on what they said and did. And then that's kind of how, like the next generation would be brought up, was with this this knowledge and this understanding.
Yes, in the pedagogy, the way our children learn, there's a Hawaiian olelo no eao, or a proverb, and it speaks to the notion of observation. Ika na na no ike. That says we learn by observing. And I think most cultures, most children, that's how most of us learn, from our environment. So this notion of nurture and nature, part of that nurturing process is to, I guess, immerse them in the things you want them to learn, so that they're watching and seeing, and there's a reinforcement when something is done properly, right? Or if not reinforcement, some kind of corrective measure because you behaved improperly. So yes, in order to pass this information on, not only would you tell the story, but you would associate it with some practice or activity, which, interesting enough, is why the hula is so valuable, because the hula is storytelling, but you're also seeing motions. And if you understand the code and the emotions, you're now getting that information in 2 or 3 ways. You're hearing the music and the words, you're watching it and seeing it, and then you're feeling it. And what's happening there is that you're getting it at 3 levels: mind, body, and spirit. Right? And in that way, you're moved. There's something that stakes with you. You just experienced the story. You just didn't hear the story. And I think from a memory standpoint, a learning standpoint, that's critical. It's very different than the teacher standing at the front of the room instructing, giving you instructions, which is very linear. This storytelling process or oratory was a critical component of that, because you needed to see that. And I think many teachers have, and different disciplines have reinforced that idea. It's the images you hold in your mind, as well as the emotion that you apply to those images, that your subconscious mind, or as we say in Hawaiian, the unihipili, it doesn't know what's real and what's not real. It just accepts the fact that that's what you're holding in your mind. And so what appears to be just simple storytelling is actually a methodology that passes on generational information.
When we talk about the spirit of aloha within a family unit, what does that look like?
Well, once again, I think we look to our elders. And in the absence of elders, then we tend to look outside. So the family unit is a critical component. And so how those elders are treated and how they treat others, again, that giving and receiving, really begins to inform, the keiki or the opio, the next generation, the children. So for instance, if you're at a family gathering, before the children eat, those that have the capacity would be given the opportunity to serve one of the elders. And in the process of serving that elder, or watching an older brother, sibling, serve grandma or grandpa, they were learning this process, one, of respecting one's elders, but also service, right? And so there was a protocol, who ate first. Now, obviously, little children, the very small ones, they weren't expected to do that. And grandma and grandpa would tend to want to feed them first. But even in that process, where the kupuna, the elder, says, no, let's feed the children. That's also a demonstration of sacrifice. No, I can eat later. And that was a tendency. My grandmother would be the last person to sit at the table in her house during her celebration. It could be her birthday. But that's how they were. So that itself was also a demonstration. Community first, family first. And if you're paying attention and you begin to recognize that in that order, that creates a series of order, everyone knows their place when there's time. And so you don't have everybody just slamming on the buffet line, right? Everyone waits. Everybody sits back and they wait. And sometimes it's challenging because everyone's waiting for somebody else to move because they want to be respectful of that. And then again, that's another process. When a kupuna sees that happening, they'll take the step to either step up or they'll push somebody in the line and say, okay, you go, you eat. So once that permission is given, then it starts to flow again. But really what it's speaking to is an awareness, a respect, looking and seeing and watching and feeling. And when you get to that point, then you act. So it's about action as much as it is about awareness.
Well, and I know from what I've studied, but maybe you can kind of, because obviously you live it, if you could share with us what the Hawaiian spirituality is with nature as well in regards to the spirit of aloha.
Yes, we are nature. Our contemporary thinking has kind of separated us from that in many ways. And more of us are beginning to recover from that and recapture our relationship with nature. And so the aloha spirit is that all things have spirit. And we refer to them as my cousins on the continent do. These are our relatives, the trees, the bears, the animals of the sea and land. They are relatives. And in many cases, they were the first settlers of a place that welcomed us into their homes, the forest, the ocean, the midlands, whatever they are. And so the aloha that is shared there is when we enter the forest, those that continue the practices, you always announce yourself. And you announce yourself with protocol called oli or chant. And you let them know what your intentions are. You let them know why you're there. Or if anything, you just respectfully let them know they're there, right? Just to be acknowledged is an important thing. And the aloha spirit is about acknowledgement. But it is also about minding your own business, which means when something is going on in the forest, you don't step in and impose upon it what you want, right? It's a matter of acknowledging it. So that respect in the forest, in the ocean, that's no different when we go to the ocean. If you are going there for the purpose of sustenance, for the purpose of catching food for your family, you don't take more than you need. You only receive what the ocean gives you, which means you can walk into the ocean and in the absence of pule or prayer or this call, you may not see any fish, or all the fish that come up to you are too small or they avoid you. However, those that continue the practice and recognize that, they will find they'll go into the ocean and the fish will present themselves. There will be an abundance, and or just when you think there's nothing, that one fish will make itself available. As it is in the forest, that particular bird or that particular fruit. And if you're patient enough, things like that happen. So the aloha spirit is alive all around us. It's what we refer to as mana. And so when you tap into that mana, it taps back, because we're really in it. It's not something that you generate like a grinder of some kind. The old generators where you wind it up and everyone shocks one another type of thing. It's not something you generate. It's something you tap into. And the aloha spirit, the spirit of mana, this life-giving energy, which is in all things. The aloha spirit is part of that. It's connecting. Again, it's not so much something you see physically. It manifests itself in behavior.
It sounds like the aloha spirit is this very deep connectiveness with everything, with family, community, nature, the animals. It's just very deep connectedness and awareness.
It is, and sometimes it can be very fleeting, as well. It's like sitting in a room and you see something out of the corner of your eye. It's obviously present, but when you turn, it's gone. It's a shadow that is cast on the ground for a moment when the sun is in the right position, but a moment later it's not there anymore, simply because the sun was blocked by a cloud, or it's a change in time of day. And so, as constant as aloha is present in the universe and everything around us, its expression can be fleeting, because it's an internal expression. It's a behavior. And it's not something you can recreate just because you want to recreate it. That becomes a mechanical practice. I'd like to say that when all the conditions are appropriate and ready, and you are ready for that condition, and you position yourself for that, aloha presents itself. It's there. And I think it's an important message to us, because there's a tendency for us to want to mechanically replicate these emotions, these feelings, these senses. And that's where the problem comes, because it becomes a contrivance. It's not authentic. It's not real. It's not genuine. And it is a challenge. You just have to be present. It really means being present.
I think, a lot of times with the holidays, there's this also flip side of, yes, there's the caring and outpouring of love and what have you, but then there's this flip side of commercialism. And sometimes people feel like, gosh, I have to go gift shopping, right. Or I have to get my Christmas cards out before it's too late, or holiday cards, whatever the case may be. And it's a lot of pressure to get things done and perform, or maybe live up to expectations that are, I would think, very difficult at times.
Yeah, that is a challenge. I mean, I think I've confronted it on numerous occasions. It's this sense of obligation. I'm being forced into a practice of buying something because I'm also obligated to present something. And that's the contrivance I was talking about. That's the manufactured, experience where you're now buying into, pun not intended, the market practice of Christmas rather than the spiritual practice of Christmas. Mm-hmm. And it's like, I gotta buy this present for this. I gotta show up with something. Mm-hmm. But see, at that point in time, it's really about you, right? It's not about that other person. Well, if I don't come, they're going to think this. If I don't bring this, or if I don't, everyone's giving you this. And then we start measuring our gifts. How much did you spend? Or that's the wrong message, right? It's completely off track. And if we trace the practice and the lineage of gift giving, at least in the Christian perspective, mm-hmm. coming from Christ Mass, the Mass honoring Christ's birth and presence. The presents he received weren't the kinds of presents we're talking about today. I mean, that was honoring who he was. These wise men from some place brought him. And if you trace that tradition, you'll find different meanings behind that. So over time, we've translated these practices into different things. But if we are attaching our ego state to this gift, then the gift it'll be felt. I mean, mm-hmm. people will feel those gifts. It's the last minute running to 7-Eleven to pick up a keychain.
Or ugly sweatshirt, or they did the ugly sweaters. That's like a thing,
Right. So, the real part is the receiving, and I would offer that someone that has not given time or thought to gift giving, and they may give that gift that was less than, perhaps appropriate. But the person on the other side receiving the gift can make all the difference. By receiving it openly, say, thank you very much. They're really appreciative because it's not so much the gift, but it was the gesture. Mm-hmm. Right. That's the opportunity to express aloha. Right. So yeah, I just got something that I would never wear, but I really appreciate that this person spent the time and energy, or at least thought about me. They could have been thinking about other things that gone somewhere else. Mm-hmm. So even in the last minute, they still made the effort to acknowledge me with this gift. And at that point in time, that's, as the receiver of those gifts, that's when we express aloha. I could easily say, Mom, what did you do? Stop at 7-Eleven? That type of thing, which, but talk about throwing it back in their face, right? Mm-hmm. So aloha is two ways. It's giving and receiving. So the spirit that I give something is that I give it without expectation of anything in return. When I receive something, I never forget to give back. Mm-hmm. It is in that reciprocity agreement that if we all abide by that and we all embrace that, then if you play that out, technically no one should ever be without. Yeah. Because every time I receive, I'm going to give. And it doesn't necessarily mean back to the person that gave it to me, because they may be giving it to me in absentia. So what I could do then is return that favor or pass it forward, as some of us would say, mm-hmm. by finding someone who is in greater need than I, and to say, hey, I have the capacity at this moment to help you or to present you with a gift. And that is the giving back. Now, that's a little different than regifting.
So that ugly sweater you might have to hold on to, right? Yeah. Or the one I receive. Yeah.
Right. You look cold. How about having this sweater?
Yeah. Lord, forget that it's probably the ugliest thing to hit a rack, but but it really is. I mean, you get to like the thought behind some of these things. It's interesting. As opposed to gifts, I always prefer like someone call or send mm-hmm. me a note. Mm-hmm. I'd rather have that, and mm-hmm. I value and treasure those mm-hmm. over anything.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think it's the expectations that we set up for ourselves and others that I think frames the space in which spirit can live. So if it's not living within you, then where is it living? Right. Yeah. And if we're looking for it outside of ourselves at that point, then we've got other things to be worrying about. But that's why our temples, our churches, our living rooms and spaces where we spend time with people, it's important, that atmosphere, that space. And that's part of the word aloha, the word ha, the spirit, the life-giving breath, but it also refers to atmosphere, your space. And so that atmosphere that you create, and the atmosphere, hopefully during the time of in the holidays, the holy days of Christmas, is that it's reminiscent of that commitment to that spiritual, commitment to spirit. And so whether it's a tree or it's a candle or whatever it is, those are the symbols, the physical symbols, to remind us that it's now time to enter into that sacred space of spirit. And that's very difficult to do when you're walking into, any retailer and they've got Christmas trees up before Halloween, right?
Yeah.
Because now we've extended that space and we tend to start losing that spirit because we're focused on perhaps the inappropriate things at that time. Yeah, it is a very interesting dilemma for us,
Yeah. Well, and as a culture, regardless if we're as a people, regardless if we're Hawaiians on the mainland, in France, Iceland, wherever it is that we are, how can we incorporate a little bit more of aloha into our daily lives?
It's every day I think we're presented with opportunities to share, be, and live aloha. Mm-hmm. And oftentimes it's without acknowledgement, because that's really aloha in many ways. Because we're doing it not because we want to be seen. That's important. So let's just say there's someone who's at the counter and they're fumbling through their purse. They don't have the right change. Everybody's standing in line, and the pressure of the world is now on them. To actually step up and provide the cashier, say, here, I'll take care of this for her. Mm-hmm. And off you go, right? It's not even expecting and waiting for a thank you. It's a gift that is real and in the moment, Yeah. And what you've just given this person, and it's not whether they have it or not. It's in that moment they were in a position of compromise, right? They're trying to find it. They're now dealing with depression. And who knows what that person walked into the store with on their mind and their heart. But clearly, things aren't flowing, right? Mm-hmm. And so anything we can do to keep things flowing. And I think it comes down to common courtesies, which we have perhaps reduced just to customs of opening a door for someone or letting someone in traffic before they have to force themselves through. And it's having that sensitivity that every day these common acts of kindness are really in many ways an expression of one's aloha for self as well as to others. So rather than getting riled up about somebody cutting you off on the highway or on the road, just being knowledgeable and accept the fact, hey, we're in a time of stress. We're in a time when everyone's doing this. So rather than jumping in there defensively, jump in with aloha and recognize the next opportunity is let somebody else go. And interesting enough, the guy behind you sees that, mm-hmm. Someone else sees that, and then that becomes, hopefully an infection, a positive one that others will begin to do, right? And that, again, ikanana no ike, by observing we learn. Same with our children. When you're standing at a counter and your child is with you, how we exchange words with those on the other side of the counter, with or without aloha, is how our children will treat the next person when they're in that situation. And so they're always watching. They're always observing. And so despite the fact I may tell the child next to me, remember, always be polite. The minute I start screaming somebody out, that is that polite? Okay, so that's mm-hmm. what polite looks like. Okay, great, right? So ever more so as we end the year or come to the end of the calendar year and we have this time, we in Hawaiian call it makahiki, the time of renewal. This is the time to renew our commitments to that reciprocity and to community and to spirit. So regardless of where you are in the world, aloha is present within you. It's really as much an attitude and not just aptitude. So I think there's always an opportunity to show that. And in very, very simple ways. It doesn't have to be extravagant, or over the top. Mm-hmm. Simple things go a real long way. We never know sometimes the impact of one simple act of kindness, right? And or patience. Yeah. And kindness and patience having to be at least two of the ingredients of aloha.
And I think having also that, the Hawaiians are such a phenomenal example of this, is just being present. Because I think a lot of times nowadays, we're so tied into devices, or smartphones or tablets, whatever, that being present is almost like a lost gift.
Yes, I have to agree. It's intentional. At this point in time, we have to be intentional. Mm-hmm. And the other word is mindful. Because of these distractions. In Hawaii, we recently passed a law, or they passed a law here in Honolulu, where you can be fined for walking across the street looking at your tablet or your phone.
That's
even
great.
just yeah. I mean, and it's odd because for us to have to legislate safety because common sense isn't doing it for us. We just at some point in time become so much into this iPad, right? Mm-hmm. And it's not so much the label or the brand, but the notion that this is mine and this is my space, my pool. And at that point in time, we go into this bubble. And so I've seen people, walk right into the street to risk their own lives because they haven't finished sending their text.
Yeah.
And okay, we might be able to say what you do with your life is your own, but you're really not being respectful of the person that just hit you with their car, that now have to live their life knowing that they hit you, and possibly hurt you and your family forever. So in those cases, it's not the law imposing upon you something because you aren't capable of living by your own constructs, right? We have to create a construct for you.
Yeah.
What it's saying is, as community, we need to be much more mindful of one another. People just don't get it. If you cut somebody off in the street and they end up in an accident, you may be miles away before you even realize. You may never realize the chain of events that you just created. But there is a family now in mourning. There is now someone that is going to have to go out of their way to get their car fixed, and that stress passes on. So it works both ways. In the absence, you can create this chain of events. In the absence of aloha, but in the presence of aloha, you can create another chain of events. It speaks to the notion that we're all connected. So as soon as we accept that and raise that to a higher level of appreciation, then I think this becomes a much more natural state of being rather than one that we have to work at, simply because it's the way it is, and how we treat people and how we, it's just a reflection of that deeper concept. And there have been people in my life that when I see them, when I think of them, they just embrace and embody and reflect that concept. And they rarely ever use the word. Mm-hmm. They rarely ever use the word. But if someone asked me, I said, that's an example of aloha right there. That person, that being, that activity, right? And if you ask them, what did you just do? How would you do it? They would look at you with a blank stare, like, what are you talking about?
Yeah, like, what do you mean? It's because it's a way of being.
Absolutely. It's like the fish in the ocean we talked about the last time. Mm-hmm. If you ask the yellow tang, how did you learn to swim? Well, what? The school of fish doesn't mean the swimming school, And so we've gotten to the point where what ought to be a natural condition or a natural state of being, which is a very powerful word, being that. Mm-hmm. Or we're now in a state of becoming that, or having to really work towards these conditions of natural state. And we've talked about it before, this notion of natural time versus artificial time. Christmas is, in many ways, an artificial time. Mm-hmm. But gift giving can be a natural time because you can give gifts at any time. You don't have to wait for Christmas to give someone a gift. So that's what I think it comes down to. Aloha spirit, in many ways, is being present, not just giving presents, but being present. And sometimes, as you just said, a little note or someone spending time with you can be the best present ever. And it has nothing to do with the wrapping that it comes in, the box or the plastic.
Well, I consider the time you spend with us to be exactly like that as well, because every time we get together and have these discussions, I learn so much, not just about the Hawaiian culture and there's the spirituality that the Hawaiian culture embodies, mm-hmm. but how we can be more connected and just more in tune, as individuals.
Yes, it is the daily challenge, because as you mentioned earlier, whether it's a phone, an iPad, or even the boxes that get us around from place to place. We all live in these boxes. And many of us spend more time in the box than out of it because we're looking at computers all day. We're watching TV, even going to the big box theater. If you think about it, we are in boxes constantly, whether it's our office, our homes, and those manifest into spiritual, mental, emotional boxes. And so it's not too far-fetched to say we got to get out of the box, right? And that little box tends to be our head, that 5 or 6 inches, that we spend so much time in, and begin to reach out beyond ourselves. And that's part of aloha. And hopefully Christmas is one of those times. But once again, if I carry that metaphor out, what are we focused on at Christmas? Boxes. How many boxes, regardless of the shape, do I have under my Christmas tree? How many boxes have I put under your Christmas tree? And that's really disturbing when you start walking around house to house to see how many boxes are under someone's tree. Is that a true reflection of our relationships? Is it a true reflection of our worth and our value? And is that what we're measuring ourselves by now? It's really, if you meditate on that for a while, it's like wow, how did I get here? How did we get here? And again, it's not to say that gift giving is a bad thing, but it's the intention behind it. It's the spirit behind it. And if it begins to be divisive, where children are fighting over the blue one versus the red one, or his is bigger than mine, or how come he got one and I didn't get one? Somewhere we miss that, right?
Yeah. Somewhere along the way, it's like, what are we doing,
Yeah, and when I see children behaving that way, at the risk of being judgmental, we have to ask ourselves, what's the root of that behavior? Where does that come from? Where did they learn that? Because I don't know that we come into the space with that kind of perception, right? So somewhere they've seen that, whether it's the word they're using, the behavior, the facial expression, that's a mirror. So our children are our mirrors. And we like to say, I know the parents by the kids, and you can tell in many cases. Now, in fairness, there some children, they are more influenced by their surroundings. But again, in the boxes that they're in, right? So if my child is learning their behavior from the internet or from SpongeBob or, from some character, then what does that say about my character, in terms of being able to share that with them? I had a teacher tell me there's a difference between having character and being one. And I think that's an important concept, right?
Yeah.
So we are in a time, again, whether it's Hawaiian time, natural time, Christmas time, of renewal, reflection, redefining as we prepare to welcome, a new year. I think it's important for us to renew our commitments to spirit, aloha spirit, whatever you want to call that.
I'm so glad you touched on that, because with the new year coming up, what are some ways that we can make commitments to aloha spirit and to ourselves?
Well, I think it's acknowledging we live in a place that we're being bombarded, if you would, by information, in some cases noise. And so finding a way to filter that with aloha. So rather than reacting to something you hear, to something you see, to come to judgment quickly, to check in with self, right? Why am I behaving this way? What is it about me that is being impacted by what I just saw or heard, rather than just reacting? Now, in times of fear, that's what those reactions are. I need to get out of the way quickly. That's a little different, But when you can take the time, the old notion of mom and grandma say, count to 10 before you act. there's a reason for that, right? It's to step back for a moment before you unload on somebody. When you find out the true story, then you feel terrible. So I think part of it is going into the new year knowing that, yes, there will be challenges. We have an election year coming up. People will start saying things. And we've already seen it. We were just coming out of, or in the middle currently of stuff that's going on that you could easily get wrapped up in. And if you're not careful, we can impose that on others. So maybe one day we can even go into that conversation of the difference between fear and faith.
I'd love that. We'll have to do that next time.
yeah, because in many ways that's what's happening. And so a quick precursor of that was just recognizing that there is no fear without faith. And we think it's the absence of, but really it's the faith in that very negative thing occurring that is what's fueling our fear. So they go hand in hand. So it's just a matter of where you choose to place your focus, fear or faith. And so I think Aloha's spirit, or the spirit of Aloha, is something that helps us to embrace it and to make sure that it's an appropriate response. Mm-hmm. Aloha is not something to consider as a weakness because I'm being kind or gentle. By all means, no, don't look at it that way. And Aloha is not something you apply, or to say that you can walk all over me. That is not Aloha either. To allow yourself to be beat up and all that kind of that isn't Aloha. Just because you don't want to hurt somebody else. You have to Aloha yourself as well. You need to protect yourself and your family. But it's the spirit of Aloha is also about discernment. And I used that word the last time we talked, discernment, which is, if applied inappropriately without these guidelines, can quickly become discrimination, and prejudice and all those other things, which is really rooted in fear in many ways. So once again, where is my faith? If I say I'm a person of faith, is it my daily practice of scripture or temple or whatever it is? Is that really my faith? Is that just an outward demonstration of it? Or is it being able to walk into darkness knowing that I have a light within to guide me? I think that's the difference, is that I can walk into this place of darkness. I may not know where I'm at. I may not know what's about to come. But I have the faith that I have the ability, that I'm tapped into something greater than myself that has the ability to take me through it and get me through it. And hopefully be the light for others. Not with intention, but with presence. It's not just to be there for them, but to be there, regardless of who's there. See, that's the language of presence. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's showing up, regardless what else is happening.
Yeah, and not because it's a show. No. Showing up versus doing a show. Yeah. That's different, Some people show up, and it's their practice to show up late, right, to something. Because
to anything, yeah.
Ta-da, here comes the president type of thing. It would be great if everybody had their own musical entry, right?
I know somebody who her ex-husband has got Darth Vader's song. When her phone plays, her ex-husband, his ringtone is Darth Vader's entrance song.
Wow. Oh, boy.
Yeah, so some people do have their own entrance, but I understand what you're talking about, because when you look at, there are people that that you can trust on, that you can trust that will be there no matter what, and other people, they'll show up after help is needed or the event is done.
Right. Yeah, it's you can anticipate that, mm-hmm. and at that point in time, you're known. You're in the known group. Don't worry, he's going to be here, but, don't expect this or don't expect that. And that may be a good or bad thing. And at that point, you're being consistent. You're consistently late. You're consistently, and at least you're consistent. Right? But at that point in time, how reliable are you? And again, I can rely on you to be late. Is that a good thing? I don't know. sometimes, we have to reframe that thing. They say better late than never. Well, maybe sometimes it's better never than always late,
Yeah.
Because as my mother would say, when you're late, you're really stealing, you're stealing from other people. You're really saying to them, I'm more important than you. My needs come before yours. And despite the fact that you asked me to be here at 5, I'm coming at 6 because that's the most convenient time for me. Those statements, going back to our conversation earlier about presence, right? The grace of the person receiving us late is what makes this thing happen, right? Because we always know you're going to be late. So we love you anyway, but we won't expect you when you said you're going to be here. Now that, if you really think about that, that's a tough one. Oh, well, they'll forgive me. They'll forgive me. They'll forgive me. What you're really saying is that you don't care.
Yes. That's
right?
Exactly what's going on there.
Yeah, it's all about me. Mm-hmm. And even if it's an inconvenient thing to be there on time because you did, that's part of the sacrifice. That's part of the gift. That's part of the giving of being community, right? Saying, you invited me. I know that your time is precious, so I'll be there. And so much so that I'll be there on time, or I'll be there early. And I think it's an important thing. We love everybody but at the same time, I also know that I won't expect them to be on time.
Well, it's interesting. I heard a while back, and I can't remember from who, that really where we show our attention is what we really love. So if we end up showing up late and not being there for people when they really need us, we're really showing them that we love ourselves more, or, that they're really not as important. So it's like, you talked about a little bit of, we were chatting about, being too hooked up on our devices, with phones and tablets and TVs and what have you. And this isn't a judgment. This is just what, I've heard is basically that, if we're showing more attention to those things as opposed to maybe family members or children, it just is showing without saying a level of, well, I love this more than spending time with you.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. It's intention again. It's commitment, and it's demonstrating priority. What are your priorities at that moment?
Yeah.
So if you're consistent, again, if there is an agreement, I think this is something we all come to the planet with, a set of agreements. If that is our agreement, that I invite you at 1 and you show up at 2, okay, I agree that that's your behavior. Then I really can't complain because we agreed to that. But if we set up an agreement that says we're going to be on time, then we should live by those agreements. And God only knows how many times any one of us breaks an agreement, but how we respond to that and how we recover and how we amend, or remedy that is just as important as breaking the agreement, right? So it happens. But if that becomes a regular behavior, then it's demonstrating, again, as you said, what our priorities really are. Which is why sometimes I have a real hard time with the notion that, better ask for forgiveness than permission. That works maybe once or twice, but if that becomes your mantra, then what you're really saying is that you're really not playing by the rules.
Yeah, you're using an unfair advantage, just kind of doing whatever and hoping people will forgive you later. Well, it may work, feel like you're saying a couple times, but it may not too.
Yeah. Especially when people are relying on you. And again, as I said, in natural time and artificial time, that's creating an artificial condition. And perhaps taking advantage of that word, the concept of unconditional love. I love you unconditionally, but there are reasons for me to be angry with you. There is a difference. I can still love you and be upset, right? And not compromising that. I can't let my child run into the street I have to be forceful, otherwise they'll injure themselves. And I'm doing that out of love, not out of anger, right? And that's hard to translate for people who now have placed either the spirit of aloha or the spirit of love or something in another form that says you're never angry, you're never upset, you don't, those kinds of things, those black and white definitions. Yeah. So I think it's the same thing.
What are some final thoughts that you'd like to leave us with for the new year as we start coming into the new year?
I really think we need to be kind to ourselves and to one another. I think it's the one thing that I'm experiencing and seeing around me, not just here in Hawaii, but through that box that we watch every now and then, or we listen to, is that there seems to be a growing, or perhaps a falling back to a time of fear and anxiety and divisiveness, which is not, again, this notion of diversity, which we talked about the last time, but clear lines of division. And I recently experienced that in a community where those who were doing what they thought to be right were being called out by others because it didn't fit their expectations. And it created such turmoil. And they're living in that condition on a regular basis. So I think the spirit of aloha transcends, that. And there's reason to be cautious. That's not what I'm saying. We should be cautious because there are those who would hurt us. There are those that want to hurt us. And as we travel around the world and from our families and all those kinds of things, we need to be mindful about our destinations, get there safely, spend time with family, but acknowledge that there are people out there that may not have that same desire for us. Knowing that, however, we should not fall into the trap of fear and treat everyone like they want to hurt us. And I think that's especially at this time, with all the things that we're hearing and we're seeing. Yeah, I guess I could make an excuse and or have a good reason for distrusting the next person.
Yeah.
But I think if we fall into that, then really, what does it say? What kind of community space do we create? So I know it's hard. It may be simple to say, but not easy to execute. But that would be my wish. I think it would be my hope that into this new year, and as we close out this one, that we could all embrace the spirit of aloha, at least for a little while. And hopefully we can plant that within our communities, our families, and ourselves, so that we can nurture that into the new year. And hopefully that will be the fruit that we will enjoy, the benefits of harvesting later on in the year. But we have to plant those seeds now.
Well, Ramsay, thank you so much for spending your time with us today. And I just so appreciate all the time that we get to spend. I can't wait for us to have the talk again about faith and fear in the new year. And now
I have faith we'll do that.
Yeah, well, now I'm so curious. I'm like, gosh, I want to have the discussion now, but we're going to wait until the new year. And in January, definitely would love to have you back to talk about that, because I think it's such an important thing, especially as we start a new year. We can kind of reevaluate our feelings and our perspective on both.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. In the meantime, to you and your family, the happiest and merriest of Christmas and holidays. And to all your listeners, I wish them well, as that they too can enjoy the time, the spirit, and happy holidays and Merry Christmas to everybody.
Oh, happy holidays and Merry Christmas to you too. And I know our listeners can go to your website. I just love your website. It's ramsaytaum.com.
Thank you.
And they can be part of your community and also connect with you on social media. There are links there that they can do that. So, Kumu Ramsay, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us here today.
Thank you, Marianne. I really appreciate it, as always. So wish you well in your family.
Well, thank you, Ramsay. And if you'd like to visit Ramsay's website, it's ramsaytaum.com. That's the end of our time today. I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne. And remember, make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Moments with Marianne airs every Thursday, Friday, and Sunday at 8 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Mountain Time. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.